Our second reading today, our gospel reading, comes from the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 10, verses 46 to 52. If you'd like to follow along in the Bibles there in your pews, I'd invite you to do so at this time. It's on page 823. Let's all listen for God's word to us today. They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I've got a word that I would like you to think about throughout the sermon today. The word is pentamento. Pentamento. Do you know that word? Pentamento is a word from the world of art. If I understand it correctly, it's when an artist has put a base color on the canvas, or perhaps has already painted a picture, and then she changes her mind and decides that there will be a different base color or a slightly different picture. But after the painting is done over the course of time, that original base color or the original picture, it starts to bleed through onto the surface of the painting. So while you can certainly see the final result and what's on the surface, you can also see what's behind, what's beneath the surface of the painting. It's called pentamento. Now, I don't think it's a word that ought to be limited to the world of art. It also happens in the Bible when we hear a story about one thing, but underneath the story there's another layer. And the more you look at the top layer of the story, the more that underneath layer starts to bleed through. A perfect example is our text from Mark for today. Today's story is most definitely pentamento. Why? Well, on the surface, it's just another healing story. Jesus gives a blind beggar his sight. Do you remember the person's name whom Jesus healed in this story? Do you remember his name? Bartimaeus. Good, Bartimaeus. Did you know that out of all the people Mark describes Jesus healing in his gospel, Bartimaeus is the only one whose name we know? By my count, there were at least a dozen other healing stories prior to this one. Simon Peter's mother-in-law is healed by Jesus. Jairus' daughter is healed. You remember the story when those friends brought the paralytic and dropped him down through the roof to Jesus? Yeah, we don't know his name. And we don't know Jairus' daughter's name. And we don't know Simon Peter's mother-in-law's name. But we do know Bartimaeus' name, Bartimaeus. And what's curious is that we're not only told his name once, we're told his name twice. Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, is what Mark writes, which makes you think that his dad was Timaeus, and Timaeus' son is Bartimaeus, all of which may be true, but it's an odd thing to write because Mark is repeating himself with that phrase, being completely redundant with that phrase. You see, bar is the Aramaic word for son. So to say that the blind man's name was Bartimaeus was to quite literally say his name was son of Timaeus. So when Mark writes Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, it's like saying son of Timaeus, a blind beggar was sitting by the roadside. I think Mark wants us to pay attention to this person's name. I think all of this is a clue that we're into some Pentamento with this story, that there's something important about this particular healing story, which appears right before Jesus enters Jerusalem, right before the last week of his life when he goes to the cross. There's something that Mark wants us to see in this story that is not on the surface. What do you think that something might be? Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. You know, if you Google the name Timaeus, you'll discover that Timaeus is also the name of one of Plato's dialogues. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, in the Timaeus, Plato presents an elaborate account of the formation of the universe and an explanation of its impressive order and beauty. The beautiful orderliness of the universe is not only the manifestation of divine intellect, it is also the model for rational souls to understand and to emulate. Such understanding and emulation restores the soul, according to Plato, to its original state of excellence, a state that was lost in its embodiment. Okay, what does all that mean? It means that Plato's Timaeus presents a particular way of seeing the world. It explains not just how the world was created, but why, the goal, the purpose for human existence. According to Plato, the goal is that restoration of the original state of excellence of the soul, which is, in Plato's imagination, the thinking life. The life that pursues wisdom, the life of the philosopher. That's the highest life there is, according to Plato. And wouldn't you know it, Plato happens to be a philosopher. In Plato's world, the one who practices philosophy and thinks the right way is the person who is closest to the divine. They're at the top of the ladder. They have achieved what life is all about. Now, why does all this matter? Because who's blind in this story? That's not a trick question. Who's blind in this story? You can say it out loud. Bartimaeus, good, Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus. In other words, the descendants of Plato, those who believed that life was all about thinking the right way. When Jesus said that life is about loving the right way. Just before this story for today, Jesus tells his disciples, whoever wishes to become great among you must become a philosopher. No, whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. Loving the right way. And where does Jesus go right after this story? He goes to Jerusalem. He goes to the cross. He goes to give his life for all people, because that's what the love of God called him to do. Jesus said that Plato had it backwards. Life is not about going up, it's about going down. Of course, our society may not be living according to the Timaeus these days, but we certainly have our own version, if you will, of thinking the right way. Our society says that those who make the most money, those who have the most followers on Twitter, those whose bank accounts let them retire and do whatever they want to do, they find themselves on the top rung. But Jesus said, if you want to get close to God, go to the bottom rung. You cannot achieve your way there, but you can serve your way there. Commit your life to joyfully loving those people who are down, who are out, who are on the side of the road. Samuel James is a world touring musician, a well-known blues-playing guitarist who had a difficult childhood. He lost his mother at age 12 and spent his teens in foster homes. When he describes those adolescent years, he says, I learned the magic number was 5. If you get to 5 foster homes, you're marked. your trouble. Then you go into shelters. You can only stay in a shelter for 30 days, and then you're on to the next and on to the next. This is affectionately called, he says, the shelter shuffle. Somehow, Samuel James made it past 5 and into his 7th foster home, and it wasn't going well. But on the bus to school, he remembers, there was this cute little brunette named Jenny, sitting by herself, nose in a book. And that was usually what I would do, sit by myself, nose in a book. So one day I asked her if she wanted to be loners together. She laughed, and soon I'm talking to her on the bus every day, and pretty soon we're talking every night on the phone. But back in his foster home, things go from bad to worse. So Samuel James goes back to a shelter from where he calls Jenny. I don't tell her where I am because I move so much. I've lost every friend I've ever had, including her. She just doesn't know it yet. As long as I can keep her on the phone, she won't know, but eventually it slips out, and I can't remember what she said. I just remember feeling empty when I told her and hanging up. I wait until the next week to call her, and almost immediately she hands the phone to her father. Now, at this point, he recalls, I've had a lot of these kind of conversations with parents about, don't call the house again, don't come by here again, you are a bad influence. But that's not the conversation I have. What he, Jenny's father, says to me is, would you like to come live with us? Would you like to come live with us? It was a commitment that would change the life of Samuel James forever. That is what's underneath the surface in this text. Commitment. The nature and character of commitment. This text asks us, what is it truly that you and I spend our time committing our lives to? You know why I love the story of Bartimaeus? Not only because Mark names him, and not only because he's son of Timaeus, suggesting that Plato was blind to the true purpose of life. Bartimaeus is unique because he's the only person in Mark's gospel who gets healed by Jesus and then decides to follow Jesus. In other words, he's the only one who makes a commitment. But I think I just said it backwards. What's remarkable is that he makes this commitment before he gets healed. Do you remember what Bartimaeus does when he hears that Jesus is calling him? I'll give you a hint. It's in the title of the sermon for today. He threw it off. He threw his cloak off. It's a significant decision. As the late biblical scholar William Placker writes, a cloak might have been a beggar's only possession, and a blind man who tosses something aside in a crowd may never find it again. He, Bartimaeus, is doing exactly what the rich man, a few verses earlier, could not bring himself to do. Cast aside everything for the sake of committing to Jesus. Do you see what's bleeding through now to the surface of this story? The nature and character of commitment. What does it mean to make a commitment? It's an appropriate question to ask on this Commitment Sunday. When I think of the word commitment, I will never forget the Presbyterian meeting that I was at years ago when one of the older pastors stood up to speak. I don't remember what the topic was. I don't remember what action the presbytery was being asked to vote on. But this older pastor was very concerned about this action. In fact, what he was concerned about was whether the presbytery would really follow through and commit to what they were about to say they were going to do. And to illustrate his point, he told the story of the chicken and the pig. Have you ever heard the story of the chicken and the pig? Once upon a time, there was a chicken and a pig. They were out for a walk together, and after a while, they both started getting hungry. So they tried to find a restaurant that would work for both of them. They ran across a place that the chicken thought looked really good. There was a sign out front. The sign said, "Blue Plate Special, eggs and ham for lunch." The chicken said, "This sounds delicious. Let's go in." The pig said, easy for you to say. They're asking you for a contribution. They're asking me for a commitment. What does it mean in your life to make a commitment? Y'all made one earlier in this worship service, I hope you know, when you promised to help raise Sawyer in the Christian faith. It is one of the most beautiful commitments that any church family can make. And you'll get another chance in a few minutes to make another commitment. When you bring your pledge card forward in this service, what you carry in your hand is a promise to give a certain amount of money to the church this coming year, yes, but may I suggest that pledge card represents more than your finances. Behind that pledge card is your faith. Behind that pledge card is your love for Jesus Christ. Behind that pledge card is your base color, which is your love for Jesus Christ and Christ's love for you, Christ's commitment to you, Christ's promise to mold and shape this community of faith into the body of Christ, looking more and more like Christ's body every single day. Shortly after Craig Barnes became the president at Princeton Seminary, he received an email from the pastor of the church that he had first served. He had left that congregation 20 years earlier, but this pastor wanted Dr. Barnes to know that Scott was a student at the seminary. You see, Scott was just a boy when Barnes knew him 20 years earlier. At that time, he went by Scotty. Barnes writes, Scotty was a 5-year-old cherished son of that church. I remember him bouncing around Sunday school with his older brother and twirling his father's hand while being led through the church parking lot. Over the years, however, it became clear that something was amiss with the mother in this family. We began to see her husband and the boys in worship without her, and when she did show up, she always looked scattered and disheveled. One day, the father went in to see Dr. Barnes and described his wife's alcoholism that was absolutely destroying the family. Soon after that, in fact, the father received a phone call while he was at work from the police that his wife had almost burned their house down. It just so happened that at about that same time, Craig Barnes received a call to become pastor at another church. So he moved and he lost touch with the family until he got that email about Scotty, now Scott, who was a student at Princeton. The two of them got together, and Scott brought Craig Barnes up to speed on the previous 20 years. How his father had lost his job, how his mother drank herself into an almost vegetative state and ended up in a nursing home. And Barnes also learned about the congregation that he used to serve, how that congregation rallied to offer babysitting, covered dishes, and prayers. How Scott and his brother were given star roles in the Christmas pageants year after year and found their best friends in the youth group and on the mission trips they went on year after year. Barnes writes, everyone knew the family's problems, but there was never a word of judgment. They were just being the church. When I asked Scott about his sense of call to ministry, he said it was pretty simple. He said he's never been able to get over the love of a congregation that kept showing up at his door when there was only heartache on the other side. They kept showing up year after year after year. Now, Scott said, it's my turn. Do you remember the word that I asked you to recall at the beginning of this sermon? I can see it, you're thinking it right now. Pentamento, that's right, pentamento. Pentamento is a word from the world of art, but it does not just belong to the world of art, and it does not just belong to the world of the Bible. It belongs to you. Because when I see each of you making a sacrifice to love your neighbors outside these walls, when I see each of you showing up over and over for somebody who's hurting inside these walls, when I see you demonstrating your love for Jesus Christ in this world, I see people who are saying, "It's my turn." Today, when you walk forward to put your pledge right there, I'm going to see your base color, which is the risen Christ shining through you.